Okay, let's talk about bubble theory, or what I like to call TECE. So, explicit teaching of bubble theory is essential to students developing uh, analytical writing skills. It's about building those skills up over a period of time, and like equations for mathematics, that those equations get more and more complex as you get deeper into analysis. So the first thing, if we're dealing with junior students, I'm talking years 8 and 9, maybe year 10, is our job as teachers is to identify the textual examples that we want students to use. That is essential. We cannot leave, especially junior kids, we cannot leave them to decide the textual examples for themselves. Our job as teachers is to pick out the textual examples and then to tell the student why they're important. Why are we using this textual example? Because it's important because it tells us this, and this, right? So a lot of teachers say go off and find, they go, okay, we've read the play or we've read that chapter, find yourself some textual examples and tell me how little Johnny's changed by the end of the chapter. Instead, my job as a teacher with explicit teaching, the way the education department is asking it to be done, is to lead the students towards the textual examples I want them to use. So today we're going to use Shakespeare's Macbeth, and we're going to pick a textual example out of Shakespeare's Macbeth and go and talk about how do we bubble theory that? How do we put that up on a board and elicit through questioning the responses from the students to produce an analytical sentence? So if I had, say, the technique I've got is this the dagger I see before me? And we all know, as English teachers, it's the scene in Macbeth when he's contemplating regicide and he's wandering around the castle at night. So the first thing we want to do is we write that in the centre of the board. And we put a circle around it. We say, okay, this is our textual example. Square if you like squares, triangles if you like triangles. So we ask the student to identify the technique. Now, sometimes I won't be able to do that, and it's our job again to lead them towards the technique. So if with this one, if they're unsure about what sort of technique this is, we say, well, look at the punctuation. How does the sentence end? And they go, well, it's a question mark. We say, good. Is he talking to anyone? Is he asking anyone that question, or is he talking to himself? They go, well, he's talking to himself. You say, okay, what sort of question is that? You go, well, rhetorical. Brilliant. And now we identify who's talking. So the two things we want is who's talking and what language technique are they using. So we identify the speaker. And they say, okay, who's saying this? They go, Macbeth. Right? So we end up on the board with something like this. Macbeth rhetorical question asking. So we've got the list of that from the students. We've got, is this a dagger I see before me as the textual example? And we need a contextual clause here. And this is where a lot of students fail to embed smoothly their textual example within the sentence. And what's good about a contextual clause, it enables you to embed the textual example smoothly within your sentence. So what's he doing when he says this? Or what's he seen? So the contextual clause goes top right. So textual example goes in the middle. I always go technique top left. I always go contextual clause top right. And then we have as he sees it floating in front of him. Or as he sees it floating in the darkened hallways of the castle, or as he sees it, guiding him towards King Duncan's room. Whatever the contextual clause is, it's important that that's included in your sentence. So you want a comma after the textual example, and you want a comma again after the contextual clause. So now we need to add our first effect clause. So our first effect clause, I always talks about dealing with the character or the person or who the textual example is directed towards or is describing. So you choose as a teacher, we choose the verbs, the connecting verb for the student. Why do we do that? Because we're leading them towards what the analysis is going to be. So it acts as a guide or a pointer towards what the effect clause is going to be. So we write that up on the board and we go, okay, what is Macbeth feeling at this time? And, they may not know, they might be umming and ahhing, and you go, okay, well, what's he considering doing? Killing the king. Does he think that's is a right thing to do, or does he think it's the wrong thing to do? And the kids will say, well, it considers it the wrong thing. And I said, well, what happens when you act against your own moral code, or what happens when you're tempted to do the wrong thing? And they go, well, there's conflict. And you go, good, what sort of conflict? You say it's psychological or moral conflict. And that gives you your effect clause. Okay? Conveys or highlights or captures his moral conflict when faced with achieving the throne through nefarious means or through regicide or whatever you want to say there. So the important thing there is the moral conflict. Moral, ethical, confusion, tension, all those sorts of words you want to put up on the board to give the students options on how they want to write that effect clause. Now we move to the second clause. So in the second clause of TECE sentence, we need to say what is this effect doing, what impact is it having on us as the reader? So the first effect clause is what's it telling us about the character. And here it's saying what impact does it have as a reader? Again, we want to use verbs that guide the students towards what the effect clause is going to be about. So things like foreshadows or points to or acts as, what is it pointing to? Well, we all know what he's going to do. So a word like foreshadows, and we can come up with foreshadows what? The tragic and treasonous events to come, or foreshadows his treasonous act of regicide. Okay, again, you want to use words like regicide. We add that to our vocab. Treasonous, his infidelity towards the monarch, those sorts of words builds up the students' vocab so that when they're producing analysis further down the line, they already have those words in their vocab. So we say, okay, that's a pretty good sentence. We can go over to effect clauses there. We've got the context clause. We've got the language technique, the textual example. But let's go one more. We can add another clause. Now let's think about context here. And if we've done Macbeth, we've already talked about the context. The Protestant Reformation, the disintegration of the great chain of being, the questioning of the divine right of kings, all those sorts of things, the emergence of secular humanism, Renaissance humanism, all those things are the context. And we've dealt with those things at the start of the unit before we start to play. So then you remind the students of those things and you're saying, oh, what's he saying about the context? What impact is that context having on the character? So we add another clause here where we can introduce Shakespeare. We could also have done this in any of the other clauses, but we can do it here, enabling the playwright to point to the social and ethical dangers inherent in the Protestant Reformation's rejection of the great chain of being and the moral teachings of Catholicism. So that's, again, we're acknowledging to the marker that we not only understand the character and we understand why Shakespeare has used that technique, but we also see the larger thematic concerns. It's a warning, the play's a warning against the abandonment of those traditional paradigms. So we could also go back and put Shakespeare here allows Shakespeare to give voice to his moral conflict, or allows Shakespeare to foreshadow the tragic and treasonous events to come. Somewhere in one of these clauses, you need to deal with the playwright. What is the person doing? Shakespeare uses rhetorical question to point to the ethical dangers, blah, blah, blah. So once you have done that, you can say, okay, I've now got a sentence that's got 1, 2, 3 effect clauses. I can take one of those effect clauses and I can put it at the start of the sentence. So let's take this one. So let's put this one, we start the sentence here. So what can we say here? We can say Macbeth's moral conflict when faced with achieving the throne through nefarious means finds voice in his rhetorical question asking. So again, we're going from effect clause to verb to technique to textual example, context clause, effect clause, effect clause. TECE works. Explicitly taught, it works very, very well. And once students understand the process, then the complexity can be built on. But unless they get the fundamentals, that the sentence needs to have these things in them, it needs to have a technique, a language technique, it needs a textual example, it needs a connecting verb, and it needs what is the result. Okay? Technique, example, connect, effect. So what's the effect of that technique? Good luck. We'll do more. If you like this one, follow me on my YouTube channel.